The Humble Shepherd, the life and legacy of Pope Francis. Prologue, A World Mourns, 2025. The silence in St. Peter's Square was a living thing, a heavy blanket woven from the breath held captive in thousands of chests. Faces, etched with grief and illuminated by the flickering votive candles clutched in trembling hands, were turned towards the silent balcony. The air, thick with the scent of incense and unshed tears, seemed to vibrate with a collective sorrow that transcended language and nationality. Cardinals in scarlet robes stood like solemn sentinels, their expressions mirroring the profound loss that had settled over the Catholic world. The great bells of St. Peter's, usually resonant with joyous pronouncements, remained still, their metallic tongues heavy with unspoken eulogies. The year is 2025, and the shepherd had finally laid down his staff. But the echoes of this global mourning were a stark counterpoint to a day vibrant with the raw, untamed joy of a new beginning. December 17th, 1936. Buenos Aires, a city pulsing with the tango's rhythmic heartbeat and the fervent cries of football fans, erupted in a localized celebration. Not for a victory on the pitch, though the passion for San Lorenzo always simmered beneath the surface, but for a much more personal triumph. In a modest dwelling in the Flores neighborhood, a cry, thin yet insistent, announced the arrival of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Mario, his father, a man whose days were usually measured in neat columns of figures and the quiet rustle of ledger pages, held his firstborn son with a wonder that softened the lines of his usually serious face. He was a sturdy infant, all wrinkled fists and a surprisingly strong grip. Neighbors, their faces alight with genuine warmth, arrived bearing the traditional gifts. Small jars of homemade dulce de leche, its caramel sweetness a promise of a life filled with simple pleasures. Among them was Elena, Jorge's grandmother, her eyes, the color of faded denim, holding a depth of knowing that belied her years. As she peered into the tiny face, a whisper, barely audible above the cheerful chatter, escaped her lips. "This one will bring light," she murmured, the words, seemingly a grandmother's fond pronouncement, hung in the air, a seed planted in the rich soil of a life yet to unfold. Roots, the boy from Flores, 1936 to 1958. The light that Elena had prophesied seemed to manifest early in the infectious laughter that echoed through the narrow streets of Flores. Young Jorge, a whirlwind of boundless energy, was rarely still. His days were a tapestry woven with the rough feel of a worn leather football against his bare knees, the boisterous friendship of his brothers, Alberto and Oscar, and the shared triumphs and defeats chanted in fervent support of their beloved San Lorenzo. The roar of the crowd at the Gasometro Stadium, the blue and red flags waving like defiant banners against the sky, these were the early sacraments of his young life. But amidst the rough and tumble of street games, a quieter rhythm was being instilled. Each evening, as the shadows lengthened and the scent of Milanesa frying in neighboring kitchens filled the air, Regina, his mother, a woman whose hands were calloused from work but whose touch was always gentle, would guide Jorge to kneel beside his small bed. It wasn't merely to recite rote prayers, though those were offered with a child's earnestness. More importantly, she taught him to pause, to still his restless spirit, and to thank God for the bread we share. This simple act, performed with quiet reverence, ingrained in him a profound sense of gratitude for the most basic of blessings, a humility that would become a defining characteristic. He learned that sustenance was not a given, but a shared gift, a lesson whispered in the quiet intimacy of a bedside vigil. The vibrant hues of his childhood began to transform into a starker palette when, At the cusp of manhood, at the vibrant age of 21, a shadow fell upon his rapidly growing life. A virulent lung infection, relentless and unforgiving, gripped him, threatening to extinguish the very light his grandmother had foreseen. Doctors, their faces grim, delivered the stark reality. A portion of his lung had to be removed. The world, once a playground of sun-drenched streets and the joyous shouts of his friends, narrowed to the sterile confines of a hospital room. The rhythmic hiss of oxygen tanks a constant, unwelcome companion. Confined to his bed, his body weakened, his mind, however, remained strangely vivid. In the hazy borderlands between wakefulness and fevered sleep, he dreamt. He saw a figure cloaked in simple brown, his hands outstretched, not in supplication, but in gentle offering. Birds, their plumage a riot of unexpected color against the muted tones of the dreamscape, flocked to him, alighting on his outstretched fingers, pecking at unseen seeds. It was St. Francis of Assisi, the gentle saint of the poor and the creatures of the earth. The vision, imbued with a profound sense of peace and selfless devotion, resonated deep within Jorge's weakened soul. It was a whisper in the darkness, a gentle nudge on a new path. The priesthood, once a distant notion, now shimmered with an unexpected allure, a calling born not of grand pronouncements, but of a quiet communion with a dream. Trials. The Jesuit in the Dirty War, 1970s, 1990s. The path towards that calling led him to the rigorous discipline and intellectual fervor of the Society of Jesus. He rose through their ranks, his sharp intellect and quiet authority earning him the position of provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina during one of the nation's darkest chapters, the brutal reign of the military junta in the 1970s and 1980s. The air was thick with fear. Dissent was met with savage repression, and the streets whispered with the names of those that disappeared. As the leader of the Jesuits, Jorge found himself walking a perilous tightrope. His conscience, shaped by the simple gratitude of his childhood and the gentle compassion of his hospital dream, recoiled from the violence and injustice that permeated the nation. He understood the inherent danger of harboring those deemed enemies of the state, yet he could not turn his back on the desperate pleas for sanctuary. Seminary dormitories, meant to house young men dedicated to God, became clandestine havens for dissidents, their hushed whispers and furtive movements a constant reminder of the danger lurking outside. One night, the fragile peace of the seminary was shattered by banging on the heavy wooden doors. Soldiers, their faces grim and their boots echoing with menacing authority, demanded entry, their voices sharp with suspicion. Panic, cold and swift, threatened to engulf the young men hidden within. Jorge, his heart pounding, knew that a direct confrontation could have devastating consequences. With a composure he did not entirely feel, he moved towards the door, his voice calm as he greeted the soldiers. "Would you care for some mate?" The offer, so ordinary in the charged atmosphere, seemed to take the soldiers by surprise. While they hesitated, their suspicion momentarily tempered by the unexpected hospitality, Jorge busied himself preparing the traditional South American tea. The fragrant aroma of the yerba mate filled the tense air, a strange counterpoint to the potential violence. Under the cover of this mundane ritual, a young student, his face pale with terror, slipped out a back door, melting into the anonymity of the night. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet victory snatched from the jaws of oppression, a testament to Jorge's quick thinking and unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Years later, as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the same spirit of humility and connection with the marginalized defined his ministry. He eschewed the trappings of his high office, refusing the chauffeured cars that were customary. Instead, he rode the crowded subway to work, becoming a familiar face amongst the city's everyday commuters. He walked the dusty paths of the villas miserias, the sprawling slums that scarred the edges of the affluent city, visiting the forgotten and the dispossessed. In the notorious Villa 21, a place where despair clung to the air like the dust, he knelt before drug addicts, his hands gently washing their calloused and neglected feet. A visceral enactment of Christ's love, a tangible expression of his belief in the inherent dignity of every human being. One morning, amidst the jostle of the subway car, a commuter, his eyes widening in recognition, leaned closer. "Aren't you the Archbishop?" he stammered, unsure if he dared to address the imposing figure in such a commonplace setting. A gentle smile crinkled the corners of Jorge's eyes. He winked, a conspiratorial gesture that bridged the valley of their perceived social standing. "Today, I'm just Jorge," he replied, his voice low and warm. This simple act of acknowledging their shared humanity, of shedding the weight of his title, resonated deeply, forging an unexpected connection in the mundane rhythm of city life. The Unexpected Pope, 2013. The news from Rome in March 2013 rippled through the world with the force of a seismic event. The white smoke billowing from the Sistine Chapel signaled the election of a new pope. And then, the name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. The world held its breath, surprised by the choice of a man who had lived a life of quiet service on the peripheries. His first acts as Pope Francis were a powerful distillation of the principles that had guided his life. At the Casal del Marmo Juvenile Detention Facility, during the traditional Holy Thursday foot washing ceremony, he knelt not before carefully selected dignitaries, but before a group of young inmates, their faces a mixture of apprehension and surprise. Among them was a young Muslim man. As Francis gently poured soapy water over his feet, the water sloshing onto his own worn shoes, he looked into the young man's eyes and spoke with quiet conviction. "Love is a verb," he said. It was a message stripped bare of theological complexity, a call to action, a tangible demonstration of his inclusive vision. He rejected the opulent papal apartments in the Apostolic Palace, choosing instead to reside in Casa Santa Marta, a modest Vatican guest house, where he took his meals in the communal dining room. When presented with gleaming gold cutlery, a bemused smile touched his lips. "I eat with tin at home," he chuckled, a self-deprecating reminder of his humble origins. The extravagance held no appeal for a man who had found solace in simplicity. On the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, his first appearance before the world as Pope, a visible tremor ran through him. His voice, usually steady and warm, cracked with a raw vulnerability as he addressed the vast crowd. "Pray for me," he pleaded in Italian, the simple request echoing across the square. Among the sea of faces, a wizened nun, her eyes filled with a lifetime of devotion, murmured to her companion, "He's afraid, like Peter was." In that moment of acknowledged human frailty, a profound connection was forged with the millions watching, a sense that this new shepherd understood the weight of his task and the need for their support. Reforms and resistance. The winds of change that Francis began to stir within the ancient walls of the Vatican did not meet with universal acceptance. His attempts to make the Church a more welcoming and inclusive field hospital encountered fierce resistance from traditionalist factions. When he authorized blessings for same-sex couples, a pastoral gesture intended to offer solace and recognition, the backlash was swift and bitterly scathing. Some traditionalists, their faces contorted with outrage, publicly burned his writings, the flames a stark symbol of their rejection. A powerful cardinal, his voice dripping with disdain, was overheard sneering. "He's turning the church into a circus." He saw Francis's outreach to the marginalized as a dilution of doctrine, a pandering to contemporary sensibilities. But Francis, undeterred, responded not with condemnation, but with a quiet act of radical love. He visited a transgender shelter on the outskirts of Rome, a place where societal outcasts sought refuge. With his own hands, he served them warm empanadas, his presence a silent affirmation of their dignity, his simple act of sharing a meal a powerful counter-narrative to the harsh judgment they often faced. The aroma of the savory pastries filled the small room, a fragrance of acceptance mingling with the quiet murmur of conversation, a stark contrast to the burning pyres of his rejected words. Global voice. Francis's vision extended far beyond the confines of the Catholic Church. He became a global voice for unity and understanding, reaching out across religious divides in a world often fractured by ancient animosities. In Iraq, in 2021, amidst the haunting ruins of Ur, the ancient Mesopotamian city believed to be the birthplace of Abraham, a profound moment of interfaith dialogue unfolded. Side by side, Francis and Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, the revered leader of Shia Muslims in Iraq, stood in quiet contemplation. Then, together, they lit a single candle, its small flame a fragile beacon against the backdrop of shattered stones and centuries of conflict. "Abraham walked here," Francis said, his voice resonating with a deep sense of shared history. "Let us walk together." The simple act, the shared space, the quiet words, spoke volumes about the possibility of finding common ground amidst profound differences. Years earlier, in 2017, at the prestigious Al-Azhar University in Egypt, a leading center of Sunni Islamic learning, Francis took another bold step. He greeted the Grand Imam, Ahmed el-Taib, with warmth and respect, and then, in a gesture that sparked both outrage and admiration, he kissed the Quran. The photograph of that moment ignited a firestorm of criticism from some quarters, who saw it as a betrayal of Christian doctrine. But the Imam himself was deeply moved. "This man risks his pride for peace," he declared, recognizing the profound humility and courage behind the gesture, a willingness to transcend theological boundaries for the sake of human fraternity. The final journey, 2024 to 2025. The relentless march of time eventually began to take its toll. By 2024, Francis, his once vigorous frame now frail, often relied on a wheelchair to navigate the vast spaces of the Vatican. Yet, his spirit remained unbroken, his eyes still holding that familiar spark of compassion. Confined to his private quarters, he would whisper to his aides, his voice thin but firm, "Take me to the balcony. I must see the people one last time." He felt the weight of their prayers, the echo of their hopes, and he knew he had to offer them a final blessing, a last visible connection. Easter Sunday, 2025. The crowds in St. Peter's Square were immense, their faces turned upwards, a silent vigil of love and farewell. Assisted by his attendants, Francis appeared on the balcony, his presence a poignant reminder of his enduring dedication. His hand, trembling with age and the weight of his office, slowly, deliberately, traced the sign of the cross in the air, a final benediction upon the flock he had so diligently served. The gesture, though frail, was imbued with a profound power, a silent promise of enduring faith. Epilogue. The Field Hospital, 2025. In Buenos Aires, in the familiar florist neighborhood where his journey had begun, a small hand, belonging to a child too young to fully grasp the global mourning, carefully placed a lit candle on the doorstep of his childhood home. The tiny flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the worn brick. Its light reflected in a rain puddle in the street, the very same street where young Jorge had once chased a worn leather football, his laughter echoing in the afternoon sun. A local priest, addressing a small gathering in the neighborhood, his voice filled with a gentle sadness, reminded the crowd of Francis's enduring vision. The church must be a field hospital, a place to heal the wounded, to offer solace to the broken. A drunk man, his face etched with hardship, stumbled forward, his eyes glazed with confusion. "Then where's Jorge? He bandaged my feet once down by the docks." A moment of stunned silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken memories. Then, a ripple of gentle laughter broke the tension, followed by the soft murmur of shared tears. Someone produced a guitar, its worn wood familiar and comforting. The melancholic yet hopeful melody of Caminando Juntos, walking together, filled the air, a simple song of unity and shared humanity, a fitting elegy for the humble shepherd who had walked among them, bringing his own quiet light to a world in need. The flame on the doorstep continued to flicker, a small beacon in the gathering dusk, a testament to a life that had begun with a whisper of light and ended with a legacy of boundless love. If you found this story of a humble shepherd, his journey from the streets of Buenos Aires to the heart of the world, and his enduring message of compassion and unity engaging and helpful for your English learning, please take a moment to show your support. Give this story a thumbs up. A simple click helps us reach more learners eager to explore the world and improve their English skills through narrative. And if you're eager to continue expanding your English vocabulary, improving your comprehension, and understanding the human stories that shape our world through the power of language, then make sure to subscribe to our channel, Learn English with Profi Jaimi. We bring you new stories and lessons regularly, designed to make learning English both meaningful and enriching. Thank you for walking alongside us today as we explore the life of this remarkable figure.